So first and foremost, my name is Yahisha Rosario. I am co-chair of the Purchase College Latinx Network Alumni Network. And with me, I have Krystina, who I will let introduce herself.
Hi guys, I'm Krystina Orellano. I graduated Purchase 2007 with a liberal studies degree. I was president of Latinos Unidos while on campus, and now I've come to do this program, which I'm completely excited for.
See, Krystine touched on some really good points that I definitely didn't touch on. I am class of 2013 with a duo studies in sociology and arts management, also engaged in Latinos Unidos, and just really excited to be here with you tonight. And so, you know, just to kick off this event, I would love to first and foremost introduce to you Millie Peña, our president of Purchase College, who is joining us today with great enthusiasm, accepted our invitation to kick off Purchase LatinX Network, and would like to say a few welcome words, just a few sort of insights on Millie. She grew up in Manhattan as a daughter of Dominican immigrants who did not have the opportunity to finish grade school, and she was the first in her family to receive a high school diploma and to graduate from college. She is a fellow SUNY alumni, earning one of 2 master's degrees and her doctorates from SUNY Stony Brook.
She is a renowned sociologist.
There you go.
Go ahead. A renowned sociologist, Dr. Peña most recently served as Dean of the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences at the University of California, Riverside. She was also appointed as the 6th president of Purchase College in May 2020. Her inauguration will be held next month. So let's give a warm welcome and congratulations to Dr. Peña.
Well, muchísimas gracias. Buenas noches. I can't thank you all enough for being here this evening. I'm so proud just to see so many wonderful faces and to know that the Alumni Latinx Network exists, because for me, when I was in school, or even in some of the alum scenarios that I'm in, it doesn't exist. And it's just so wonderful that we have that here at Purchase College, because it really does give us a sense of community. And for me, it's also something that really represents a lot of the accomplishments at Purchase College, and why I feel so privileged to have been selected to be president of such a wonderful institution. Because I don't know if all of you are aware, but this past year we were designated, officially recognized as a Hispanic serving institution. That means that more than 25% of our students are Latinx. And to me, that means even more than that, because if you look at the diversity on our campus, we're almost 50% total when you add up all the students. And so I say that to have been designated a Hispanic serving institution is also to recognize us as a diversity serving institution, because it means that we can celebrate the fact that numerically, we are in a position to be able to have an impact and an influence on Purchase College in a way perhaps even more than before. I actually see the profiles of many of you and what you have gone on to do. So it's really so exciting, you know, just to see how college for you really launched your own careers. For me, it was transformational as well. You heard I was a first generation college goer, born and raised in the city. It means a lot to me to see so many of you really reflect a lot of my own history, because I think it's important for us to be able to say out loud that every time there is the opportunity for our ability to be present in the roles that we are, it really resonates with students. You have no idea how many students I have bumped into. And I've also been privileged to be invited by Professor Benmergui to speak to his class. And I was able to share some things growing up about what it was like to be in a family that was very intimately involved with the urban renewal program in the city, which is a topic that he touches in his class. So for me, it's important for us to be able to talk about, you know, how do we translate this background, this experience that we have, to have Purchase College also be that transformational experience for not only the current students, but for future students, that our presence and our voice and are pushing for the way that we want to experience our educational experience is not only for our community, but it extends to others. And you see that sense of connection when you share with others, the kinds of things that you want to hear in your class experience, you want to see on campus events. And that's what I'm going to promote. I work very intimately with our campus Chief Diversity Officer, who you probably know, Jorima DeWeese. And we're already doing so many things that will impact students, but also faculty and staff in terms of thinking about having a diversity action plan. But you don't have that sort of oomph or presence or push for that unless you really have sort of the numbers that we are seeing on our campus. And to have these kinds of networks also be part of championing that and calling for that, I think bodes well for many things that we will do both on campus, but also with this alumni network, because you are basically the carriers of the flame of those who started to increase the numbers and make the numbers actually mean something. So I want to be able to have the opportunity to come to your events, to be able to partner with you, collaborate with you on ways that you can be that symbol of success for the students who sometimes struggle, but they like to hear that, those of us who persevered, did it because there's mentors and there's people in the community that are part of their support network. It isn't just, as they say, pulling yourself up by the bootstrap, but actually recognizing that we get to where we are because of not only our families, but the community that we experience at Purchase College. And so as president, that's what I like to do in the way that we inhabit the space in all the ways that we do, not just in the classroom, but also outside of the classroom and also beyond the walls of Purchase College. Once you all graduate, that you continue to be part of our community. And I look forward to really having that opportunity to think with you about the kinds of things that you as alumni see as you're being able to give back and to inspire the next generation, because I know it means so much for the students. And I know that for us on campus, it means a lot to be able to have partners enabled in our ability to have the impact that we want to have. So those are the words that I want to share with you. More than anything, gracias for the fact that you're here and you've expressed this commitment to continue to be part of Purchase College. You have never left us. We always have you in our hearts, but to have you present and involved is even more meaningful. So thank you for inviting me to be part of this evening. And I look forward to staying on for the remainder of the evening and to hear a lot of the engagement that will happen this evening. So thank you again for the opportunity to be part of this community.
Well, thank you, Millie. We're super excited to have you join this conversation. Thank you again for your participation. We're excited to continue the conversation about our community. With that being said, Yahisha will introduce our next speaker or our moderator.
Absolutely. And so introducing Leandro Benmergui, Professor Benmergui, is Associate Professor of History at Purchase. He teaches courses in Latin American Studies, Latina history, and urban history, always an eye on transnational processes. He also coordinates the Latin American, Caribbean, and Latinx Study Program and the Director of Casa Purchase, an outreach center for Latin American Studies. Welcome, Professor Benmergui.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. This is a very exciting moment to have to be surrounded by former students that I haven't had the pleasure to meet since I came to Purchase, be surrounded by my amazing colleagues and friends and staff member of Purchase. I am Leandro Benmergui. I'm originally from Argentina. I came to Purchase. We're gonna talk a lot about what Latino means, right? But to me, Latinidad and being Latino was part of becoming part of the United States. That was part of my decision to identify myself as a person of color. That's how I was seen, and that's the identity I wanted to get here. I'm also part of a wonderful group of amazing faculty in the Latin American, Caribbean, and Latinx Studies, which is an interdisciplinary program. Here we have some of my dear colleagues. Thanks for joining us. Part of our work and part of reaching out to our Latino students and to our Latino communities outside campus, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of important work. And I'm glad that we are creating this network also to work with our students. We need you. We need you to get in touch with us, to help our students, to help mentoring them, and to help finding ways to do things together and help them once they graduate to know what does it mean to be Latino outside in the job market and in the real world. Part of my work when I came to Purchase was also not to think of Purchase as the ivory tower, but how to reach out to our local communities. Westchester County has a very large Latino population, particularly Port Chester, for instance, is about 60% Latino, which means that it's a big majority, right? And a town that it's transitioning quickly, and it's Central American, it's South America, it's Dominicano, Puerto Riqueño. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of full of tensions and as well and full of problems. So basically what I tried to do was to reach out to community organizations, work with them, ask them how we can help us with our resources, try to establish internships for our students, and try to find every opportunity in which to let them know that we don't compete with them in reaching out to their own constituencies, that we are here to support them. We created different works. We used to have ESL classes at Purchase. Parents of our students came, members of the staff came, many of our janitors came to ESL classes. So basically the work is to help the community in ways that are useful for them, to create every opportunity we can, to make the campus closer to them and to make them closer to us as well. It is important to visualize ourselves. At Purchase, we are now 25%, and that's the idea, that we can be Latinos, proud of being Latinos, not speaking speaking loud about our Latinidad and visualize our lives and our experiences, our very different experiences, and also our common experiences. I don't want to talk too much, but I'd be happy to talk more about Casa Purchase, Latin American, Caribbean, and Latinx studies, and what Latino means, and how we can help each other and become a stronger, louder community. So, Krystina, Yahisha, do you want me to introduce the next panelist?
Actually, before we get into that, I'd love if you started the conversation by maybe telling us a little bit about Casa Purchase and the work you're doing there.
Yes, so basically what we are doing many different things. One of the most important things is for our students is to help them with experiential learning, to make connections with different community organizations. Many of our students work with Hispanic newspapers, helping in organizations that work with immigration services, which is a very important issue in Westchester. Many of our students work also in organizations that work not only with immigrants, undocumented immigrants, but also cases of domestic violence and issues of language barriers. We do a number of things. We used to bring before COVID kids from primary school and high school to come to Purchase, to visit the museum, to visit the Performance Arts Center. I hope they can understand that college is something that they can think of in the future. So they have a lot of fun when they come. They visit the dining center, which is probably one of the funniest things they do. And we try to help them in after-school programs and in any possible way they can. So basically, it's matching the opportunities or connecting the dots when there is a need and there is a demand.
Thank you, Leandro. And now I definitely invite you to bring up the rest of our panelists. Ya que estamos en casa, ¿no?
Muy bien. All right, so it's a huge pleasure for us to introduce Pamela Alberto, who is a current Purchase College. She's a philosophy student representing the class of 2022. And finally, we are going to have a fellow member of the Purchase College faculty, my dear colleague, Alexis Silver, who is an associate professor of sociology and Latin American, Caribbean, and Latinx studies, and mother of 3 amazing, beautifully and cute children. So let me introduce first then our first presenter, Luis Antonio Ramos. Welcome. I'm sorry. I also want to say that at any point, if you have any questions for the panel, please, we're going to have a Q&A session, but you are welcome to type your questions in the chat.
Leandro, unfortunately, Luis has not been able to join us yet, so if we could go ahead with our introductions of our question to Alexis or Pamela, please.
Okay, so let me, Alexis, I know you have some remarks about Latino identity, and I think that's a great way to start problematizing what Latino means. What do you think?
Sure. So just to, can everybody hear me okay? And my camera just changed. I don't know why, but I research immigration, just to give you a bit of my background. And I teach courses here at Purchase in the Sociology department and in the Latinx, Latin American, Caribbean, Latinx studies. I teach courses about immigration and human rights. I teach courses about cultural activism in Latin America and the diaspora. And I teach an education across borders class where we work usually somewhere in the local community with younger kids in a mentoring type capacity. So that's a service learning course that intersects nicely with Casa Purchase. And in my research, I've done research with immigrant populations, Latino immigrant populations in North Carolina. And I'm currently working on a study about return migration, compelled return and forced return to Mexico. And so in my research and in my classes, we discuss a lot about identity and what it means to have a Latinx identity. Of course, it's such a diverse community, and yet there are strings of commonality that people differently attach to at different points in their life course. So I work with, most of my research focuses on young adults or teenagers who are transitioning into adulthood, those early stages of adulthood. And so what I've found in my research is that as people age into adulthood, and in the United States, if they're undocumented, have to grapple with all sorts of exclusionary boundaries. And if they are children of immigrants, are often perceived to be undocumented, even when they are US citizens. And so there's a racial element or racializing element to identity in the United States. And I just want to share a quick anecdote from my current study about someone who was born in Mexico, but was living in Las Vegas since he was 4 years old. And he was deported to Mexico as an adult, and he was interrogated because he had a Made in Mexico tattoo. And his new acquaintance, Mexican acquaintance, was really challenging, you know, why would you have that tattoo, and challenging his sort of authenticity as a Mexican. And to me, that's such for him as well, it was such an interesting, heartbreaking in some ways, story about who gets to claim a national identity. Because in the United States, he spoke a lot about how, you know, although that's where his family was and that's where his roots were, he wasn't perceived to be a member or an insider in the United States, and then to return to Mexico and similarly be excluded. He felt, you know, heartbroken by that, but then was forming bonds with other deportees, with other people who had been forcibly returned, with other return migrants who shared a lot of these stories, and would talk about, you know, say things like, I'm never really okay, while at the same time celebrating finding that different connection to their country of birth, which wasn't always, you know, accurately portrayed as their country of origin, but certainly their country of birth. So I think as we talk about and complicate the idea of identity, we can, and I'd love to hear your perspectives and experiences about how you traverse different institutions and traverse boundaries. And I always think about Gloria Anzaldua's work about existing sort of on the border, in the margins, and having to navigate a constantly changing identity as you grow up and traverse different institutions and boundaries in your daily lives.
That's such a great anecdote. And the first thing that comes to mind is I grew up thinking that I was living in a life of duality. And I no longer think that. I think there's so much more than just duality. Because, you know, growing up, I have a mother who's Ecuadorian, a father who's Dominican. And so when I was asked, you know, where are you from? I said, Ecuatoriana Dominicana, right? That's just who I was. And so going to Purchase, that's who I was. And then I started working in multicultural marketing and sales, and I traveled a lot to Miami. And so if you go to Miami a lot, sometimes it's like another country. It's a different, you know, it's just that, you know, I'm pretty sure there's probably a better way to put this, but it's, you know, it's literally just a diverse melting pot of Latinos and Latinx. And I mean, straight from the country. And so I would say, they would ask me, and always Spanish first, where are you from? And I would say that, and they said, so where were you born? Were you born in Ecuador? Were you born in the Dominican Republic? And I would say, well, no, I was born in New York. My mother and my father, and I'm first generation, so I'm Ecuadorian Dominican. They're like, well, no, you're American, and you know, your parents are Ecuadorian Dominican. And so for a really long time, that's what I said. And so it was really weird, because then it's, you know, how do I cope with who I'm talking with and how they're perceiving me, right? The institution that I'm speaking with. And then how does that relate to how I then see myself and sort of put that forward? And I think the first time aside from, you know, college and growing up in El Barrio and in Spanish Harlem, aside from that, where I really think I questioned my identity, was Purchase, right? Where I got to be in Latinos Unidos, and I got to, you know, really sort of represent who I believed was my identity. So, you know, your story, that's kind of all those kind of thoughts just come to mind.
Thank you so much for sharing also your experience, Yahisha.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was just, like everything you just said sort of like reminded me of my own self, but the other component for me recently was actually coming to terms with the fact that I am Black. And I grew up in the Dominican Republic. I moved here when I was 11. And so moving here, I wasn't really confronted with those questions. Like identity wasn't something that I was like, oh, and it wasn't until I came to Purchase and I took a class and someone asked me, and they weren't supposed to, but they asked me and I appreciated it because I was on this journey, and like she sort of like brought it out of me, but she was like, you know, you're Dominican, but like, do you see yourself as Black? And I was like so shocked that she asked me, and I'm so grateful for the classes and the professors that I've had along the way, because like I can proudly say that I am Afro-Dominican and I love learning about like the Afro part, not just the Dominican part. So it's been just very rewarding for me as a person to not have to like tiptoe. And I was thinking about what Alexis was saying, you know, like how do we navigate these constant changing identities as we're adulting? And that's literally what I'm going through. So awesome.
Because one of the very interesting things sometimes of becoming Latino or coming to the realization, right, is knowing all our very different backgrounds. How is it that more than 50 million people, starting from the fact that Hispanic presence in the United States is as long as the history of the United States, right? So we're talking about former Spanish colonial subjects and then members of the Mexican nation whose territories were taken over by the Federal Army, right? So their presence was here. They never crossed any border. The border crossed them. They were never asked to assimilate, or they never asked the Federal Army and the people who came after them to assimilate to Mexican culture, but we are still asking Latinos to assimilate to a country that was their own, right? So that's how it starts. And when I teach Latino history, I always wonder, why is it not this a course on US history, right? So the fact that we still have to have a class on Latino history, which is not Latin American history or just Caribbean history, but the Hispanic presence, that tells us about how the curriculum is created, right? And how we can or should or think about ways to challenge those epistemological barriers that someone decided that that's US history, and then you have Black history, then you have Latino history, and then we see how do we fit in a nation of settlers, right? And then also a history of colonialism, right? Puerto Ricanos, they don't need a visa, right? They became a colony, and still we see Puerto Ricanos as foreigners, and they are US citizens. And then what do we do with all the migrations that came in the 60s, that largely in the 60s, Dominicanos, Central Americanos, Cubanos from all the colors. Some of them do not like to see themselves seen as Latinos, maybe, or yes, people with different political statuses. So what do we have in common, right? Coming with different language, maybe even Spanish, it's not our first language. Maybe an indigenous language is the first one. So what do we have in common? How do we bridge our differences? And definitely, why is it important to be Latinos and be 25% of Hispanic and not 1% Argentinian, 10% Dominicano, 11% Puerto Ricanos? Why is it important for all of us to have that common identity? So these are issues that I always talk in class. And at some point, when I bring Alexis Gloria Ansaldúa, who was an amazing scholar who talked about being caught in between two worlds, being la mestiza, right? In always fighting for these two cultures, right? Being born in the United States from Mexican parents, and those Mexican parents wanting her to be Mexican, and still she was a second generation of Mexican here, always in between, right? And at some point, how students that sometimes come to Purchase thinking that there is something wrong with themselves because they don't see themselves fitting in the culture of Purchase in the beginning, they realize how wonderful they are, that Spanish is a great asset and skill, that Spanish for native speaking, that my dear colleague Alfredo teaches in language and culture, how all these are tools, how these are skills things that we need and we should be using. So I wanted to ask you how different was, quickly, if we have time before we open to the room, how different was the Latino experience in these different moments? I'm sure for Pamela, it's different right now in 2020, and for Yahisha, for Krystina, probably different. I know Latinos Unidos, you always have debates about where do we fit, how do we fit with other student associations, especially of color, what the tensions were, what were the points of connection, and how was it for you, and how did that change? So any one of you can start.
I mean, I learned that it's no longer Latinos Unidos. I definitely want to make sure that I'm cognizant of the changes, and I think it's Latinx Unidos. And please, anyone jump in, correct me if I'm wrong. And so I definitely want to pay homage to that, because I think that is part of the change, right? I think for me, it was during a time where, like I said, I was finding my identity of what it even meant to be Latina, ¿verdad? And I was able to find a group of people that I could relate to, of different backgrounds. And it was so instrumental to my time at Purchase, because it, you know, Purchase is so diverse. There's so many different people. If you're willing to look for the experience, you'll find those different groups. And you know, that was part of the experience I was looking for, is finding people that I could relate to, and explore and realize that my crazy family isn't the only one that's crazy. And you know, like it's you know, a little bit it's part of tradition, a little bit it's religious, a little bit, there's so many facets of our Latinx culture that really influence that identity of a person and group setting. So that was the experience for me, and just seeing that, honestly, that there's so many interests even within the one group that I identify with, actors, dancers, scientists, business folks, like, you know, different cohorts within this one group.
Krystina, Pamela, you wanna?
I wish I could just be, yes. How do I say your name? Yahisha?
Yahisha.
Yahisha, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, everything that you just said, just, I feel like she's literally like a mirror. Like we're just, I don't want to say clones, because that's not really the word that I'm looking for, but just reflecting her experience onto me. Just nodding my head because I agree.
Yeah.
Krystina, how was it for you? Was it a little different?
Yeah, I think for me, it was more, you know, I'm Puerto Rican, born and raised in New York, or as they say, New Yorican. So for me, it was kind of finding my own identity within that, because Puerto Rico is part of the US, and the stereotype of we don't know how to speak Spanish. And it was kind of breaking those barriers and kind of understanding my identity as a Puerto Rican. I think for me, it was a great learning experience, being a part of Latinos Unidos, being a part of, it was almost like I was learning my culture through others, right? You know, I grew up in the Upper West Side, not many of us, you know, not many Puerto Ricans in the neighborhood. So for me, it was kind of more almost learning and relearning and understanding my culture, you know, be it, you know, being around similar people at Purchase, being president of Latinos Unidos. For me, it was definitely a learning experience, and who I am in this world as a Puerto Rican, and who we are in general. I think that was definitely my experience here.
But let me ask you something, because Latin American studies, now Latin American, Caribbean, Latinx studies started about 2013, the year before I came to Purchase. We didn't have a Latina president, right?
Nope. Everything's so different. I graduated in 2007, so we definitely didn't have a Latina president. So I love to see it. Millie, I'm so happy for you. It's definitely a step in the right direction. Again, when I was there, I was kind of discovering myself. I think everyone was kind of discovering their Latino identity. As a Puerto Rican from New York, my father is super Puerto Rican. So he definitely taught us a lot of what we needed to know. But again, growing up, I grew up in Central Park West, growing up in a neighborhood primarily, white, not many Puerto Ricans. It took me to come to college and immerse myself into Latinos Unidos to really understand my culture and be able to spread it to my other siblings, because, we found ourselves sometimes a little too sheltered. So for me, again, Millie is the first Latina president. She was on the Upper West Side at some point, close to where I grew up. So for me, just seeing these transitions and being a part of it for the generations is super important. And, we didn't have a Latinx Caribbean studies when I was there. Again, I graduated in 2007. So seeing this to me is progression, and I love it.
Yeah, and Krystina, you might not have known, but there was an organization that had a storefront office on, I think it was 88th Street and Columbus Avenue.
Oh, okay.
That was called El Comité. And,
no, I did not know.
Yeah, and they were very much focused on the whole urban renewal projects and the displacement of many of our communities. I mean, you go now to El Barrio, wow, and you can't even recognize, a lot of these neighborhoods. And not too long ago, I was down in the Lower East Side, and I remember telling a friend that you knew something had changed majorly when there was a farmer's market and somebody was trying to sell a quart of milk for $5.
Wow.
And I said they're not selling it to the people who live on Avenue A through D.
Mm-hmm. And my whole family's from the Lower East Side. So for them to see that change is like super, oh my God, for them. It's important to kind of maintain our culture and spread that love when the things around us aren't, I guess, doing so well in that department. So
I tell people I learned how to swim at High Bridge Pool.
Right.
I'm actually in Inwood right now, so I'm very close to the places you're mentioning. I'd like to open the room for questions and comments, and I think Danny's questions, there are different sets of comments, but Danny, would you like to ask yourself, or you want me to read the question?
I guess I'll ask.
Nice to see you.
Hey, Danny.
Guys. I mean, being a Purchase alum and then also a staff member at one point, it's really nice to see some of the people in the space. But I wanted to talk about like how, if the panelists can talk about how they saw their cultural and identity reflected at Purchase. Whether you saw it in the faculty members, in the buildings, in the students, how much did that play part of your experience there? And also some of the things that you enjoyed, but also some of the ways it maybe created some friction points for you during your time there.
Well, thank you for your question. I'm still here at Purchase. Like I said, I graduate next May. Oh my God, my kid is like screaming her lungs out. And I study philosophy, so I major in philosophy. There's no one in the Department of Philosophy that's Latinx, that to my knowledge. So I don't really see any reflection of myself or my experience. And I also have a kind of like I don't want to say tricky, but like a very specific scenario. So I went back to school, and by the time I came back my first semester, like 6 weeks into the semester, COVID happened. So I haven't really been able to have the interaction or the experiences that a lot of the other panelists have had. And even now where I'm back on campus, we don't really have the freedom to do as much as we used to. So I'm not really like aware or in touch with all the other things that maybe you guys had and were aware of.
Well, I think it's in some ways it's still, I mean, of course, the physical interaction in person is one thing, but I think to your point of not seeing yourself reflected in either faculty, that's something that I think I still saw myself, right? And during my time at Purchase, and not knowing that I could do what I do now. And not knowing that, that I could, even be a faculty member. I actually, one of the things that I said to myself coming out of Purchase or during my time at Purchase is, hey, Millie, I would love to come back and teach what I'm learning, or come back and teach what I'm going to go do. And what it is business marketing. You know what I mean? It's something totally different, and just something that I didn't see in the faculty there, right? But what was beautiful was because I didn't see the interests that I found at Purchase amongst my relatives and my friends that I did know from back home, and seeing that there were all these different levels of interest, whether it be acting against science or dance and visual arts and all, just different spaces. If you're not welcome to those spaces, you don't know that you can be in those spaces. And and so it allowed me to see that I can have multiple interests, because I was a sociology and arts management major, and I could explore that, and I can see where that sort of takes me. And so where it created friction, I think taking it back home. I'm first generation, and so I have 3 younger siblings, and so they saw, I think, the fun part, which is socializing and coming home with different friends and new friends, but then also just understanding that and expressing that, right? Explaining it. And then also, when you graduate, I think not even when you graduate, your parents never stop being your parents, and they still treat you like you were when you were in high school and in college. And so, explaining how my identity and who I was has evolved, I think, in my household.
And not just, to Yahisha's point, not just in the households, but even outside the households. Right now I work for a multicultural company, for a marketing agency, and to see myself surrounded by other Latinos is like it's just, I don't even know, it's super cool for me. It makes me feel good, I guess I will say, being surrounded like people like myself. And I think that's so huge, and you don't get that a lot. When I graduated Purchase, I worked for MTV, and there was not many people like me. So I guess that I would say that's kind of where the friction was, and like making them understand who I was or who we are as a collective was very hard for me. So understanding that and knowing that I can move on and work for multicultural companies was super huge for me, because I wanted to be around people like me. I wanted to be around people that understood, based just off of my experience at Purchase at Latinos Unidos. So for me, that was super important.
We have some questions from Magdalena and Ashley, who work with the Department of Education, with lots of Spanish-speaking people. And Magdalena, who is also asking about how to explain to people what Latinx mean to others. I don't know if we can answer that, but I think that's a very important question.
The X part? The question about the X?
Yes. No, I don't. That's a good question. If it's about the X or Latino, probably it's about everything.
It doesn't have to be long. It does not have to be really detailed, but it's, again, Hispanic Heritage Month. And as a Latina, I'm getting asked that. So maybe you guys can get me some feedback, or just kind of how do you go about and explain it to people? I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I got that question not too long ago myself. And I think when people ask it, they kind of have a sense of what the focus is, but I use it as an opportunity to talk about the fact that we often miss the intersections of who we are. And, so I say, there's a lot of times we don't want to look at gender as a community in the same way that we ignore race. We don't talk about all the language that we use that's racialized, that's homophobic. And I say to them that, it's an opportunity to talk about being Latino and Latina in all of our personhood. And by using sometimes the term Latino and Latina, not only are we subsuming, kind of the differences that we all, recognize. Sometimes I've used humor when I was teaching with my students. They would say, well, you're all the same. This is the, thing they would throw in my face. And I would say, well, if you walked into a Caribbean neighborhood and you showed up with refried beans, we would say, what's that? Because I was actually working with in a predominantly Mexican-American community. And then I would say, and then you would ask a Dominican, do you eat mofongo? And they say, no, I eat mango. Or a Cuban might say, well, I eat fufu. Well, everybody knows, well, it's mashed green plantain bananas cooked 3 different ways. And people hold on to that as part of their identity. And so I always say, that the things that make us uncomfortable within the Latinx community are the things that we really need to bring out and also be inclusive with regard to how we think about gender, especially, in a culture that really, I think, hyper expresses a masculinity that is, toxic in so many ways. And Latinx allows us to bring that out because it's about a certain kind of, masculinity. It's about patriarchy, and it's about assuming, binary gender. And I think that, it's an opportunity for a conversation. So there's not going to be one short sentence, because it's really an invitation to talk about something bigger. And the X allows us to talk about those things that in our families in particular, we have a hard time talking about. And I think it's important because it would allow members of our family, who find it difficult to come out to the family to have those conversations in the same way that, we sometimes have to challenge our family members not to use the racialized terminologies that they keep telling you are endearing. Like my grandma would say, abuelita, no me diga negrita. Negritas has this legacy. They said, no, mi amor, pero es que yo te quiero muchísimo. And then she would say, can she call me negrita so that, I understand that, she loves me? And I said, yeah, but we need to talk about these words because it reifies a legacy and a history that's important to really to talk about. So the Latinx is about a long conversation. Not a short one.
Thank you, Millie. That was great. Thank you.
Yahisha, I believe you wanted to say something.
No, I completely empathize with that anecdote, Millie. And I laugh because, it's a memory of my own endearing abuela, who, would do the same. And my family nickname derived from Negrita. And when my cousin was sort of informed of where Tita came from, my cousin stopped using it because, out of respect and understanding, which was beautiful to see, because, it is a long conversation and it's not an easy one to have. And so I'm actually getting emotional thinking about it. And, it's just beautiful that someone could respect you so much to just, come to terms to let go of such family habits, which are really difficult to let go of. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still waiting to have that conversation with my family. That's still my nickname. It's actually, there's no Ita, it's just Negra. And there's a whole history there for me where the same thing that Millie shared, term of endearment. And then I come here and I'm like, oh, what does this mean? And why does this mean what it means? So thank you for bringing that out.
And I think the conversation doesn't end, right? Like it's a conversation, but it doesn't end. I think there's moments where it gets frustrating, right? And that's human. But we just have to have patience, I think, with one another. And I think that's probably a really big ask for some, and I completely understand, but I think it's Latinx is an indication of that, I think, right? It's just ongoing change.
I think it speaks to what Krystina was saying. She said something earlier about it being like a lifelong process. And what you just said about it being conversations, I feel like often we have these like interactions with people and we feel like by having one conversation, we're going to change everything. And in reality, like multiple conversations, lifelong learning. And that's actually a gift, you know, the fact that we get to keep doing that. So
Actually, that's part of a label that lumps together many different people with many different experiences, right? The one time that someone told me I wasn't Latino was among Latinos, right? Because it is important to talk about privilege and difference and stereotypes and prejudice. It's not easy to be together either. And that's part of becoming something when our race relations in Latin America, in the Caribbean, are so different from those in the United States, and what do we see, how do we fit, how do we feel represented, how do we talk to each other when we eat so many different foods and our cultures are so different, and when our experiences are so different. I have a question for Pamela, which is actually from Shovo, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, which is about a question about your journey, I would say, becoming Afro-Latina, right? You mentioned that probably in Dominican Republic, Dominicanos would not have Black as or Negro as their first way to identify, and how national identity and racial identity are so connected in Dominican Republic for a history of sharing an island with Haiti, right? So how was that for you, becoming an Afro-Latina here? What does it mean for our transnational identities when you go back to the island and then you tell them, I am Afro-Latina, and they tell you, no, hijita, no digas eso, right? Or not, right? So.
Well, thank you for the question. It has actually been a very painful journey. It wasn't one that was easy. And like a couple of weeks ago, I was having a conversation with my dad, who's like the most Dominican looking person that you can imagine. And I asked him, I said, Papi, I was like, how do you identify yourself? And I gave him, you know, like some options. And one of the options was Black. And he told me that he was Moreno, but that he wasn't Black, and he was very adamant about not being Black. And then I like gave him like a short history of our relationships with Haiti and how we like actually were one nation and we fought together, you know, under the same reason and this and that and the other thing. He was like, no. He was like, that's not what happened. The Haitians did XYZ to us. And so it was interesting to see how my dad, who on the outside looks like a Black man, you know, like a Dominican man, and he is not willing to say that he's Black. And so that was also my own experience. I remember having conversations with especially people that I was friends with growing up that are Latinx, and I would not say that I was Black. And so I think that being at Purchase and having professors that not only detailed history, but really like related it to us, really just opened my mind, and it means the world to me. Like I don't walk around the world not knowing like who I am. And that matters to me because of who I am. But I also have a daughter who's biracial. And I want to have that kind of culture in my house where, you know, if I'm not armed with the facts about myself, what am I hoping to give her? You know, so I haven't had the chance to go back to the island yet, so I can't tell you the answer to that. I only have the conversation with my dad. but yeah, it's been painful, but very rewarding, and I'm grateful for it, for sure.
All right, I'm sorry I mispronounced your name, Cheryl. Can you please unmute yourself? And I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Hi, my name is Chevelle. Chevelle.
Thank you, Cheryl. Apologies. It's
And if I may
8:28.
add, actually, I have
sorry.
a very similar story as Pamela, right? So my father, I asked him about my grandmother my grandparents, and he tells me, well, my mother's mother was African and French. And so I say, okay, so at least there's not a strong denial, right? So he's willing to, but he's Moreno too, right? He's not Black, he's Moreno too. So that's, a hurdle we have to get over. And then I say, oh, so was she Haitian? That I couldn't say. And so, because I was just, bueno, pa, you said African and French. I just thinking of some history here. And he's just like, no, mommy. No, she was African and French. And I said, okay, bueno. That, and it was the whole conversation of that exactly, right? But it's very odd because then it's not so much a denial of our African heritage, it's a denial of, specifically what's going on the island. It's just there's no Haitian relations there, which I think, kind of adds, once we start talking about multiracial within our, Latinx community, right? Because I also identify as Afro-Latina. I'm like, I have so many identities. I'm also Afro-Latina, right? But then one of the questions in Chevelle's comment was, what are some boundaries you found? I find pushback not only in just my Latinx community, but I find pushback in the Black community with identifying that way. And so it's, I think just to sort of transcend more, I think Latinx community, yes, it's an identity thing, but I think it has more to do also with just community of multicultures, multi-races. And so that is a boundary that I have seen for myself in social settings and work settings that, I'm sure I'll continue to work through.
Same thing. I also have had the same experience. And the question, when I first spoke, the question that a fellow classmate had asked, she was Black, and like my response wasn't satisfactory to her. And it makes me sad to get pushback, but I at the end of the day, it's like what you said, it's conversations. This is what I have to do for me. And it is what it is. We just got to keep growing.
As writer Junot Diaz said when he came to Purchase, and he said, well, sometimes people will introduce me as a Dominican writer, an American writer, a Black writer, a New Jersey writer. And he said, you can introduce me in whatever ways you want, as far as you let me be everything I want to be simultaneously, right? So the issue of simultaneity, being able to be what we want to be and have people asking us who we are, rather than having to fit into expectations of who we are. We can be different things in different places. We cross borders and our race change, our identity change, our language change. So I always keep in mind Junot Diaz saying, let me be what I want to be, right? Don't put your labels on me. There is another question. I know it's 8:32 and I'm taking 2 extra minutes. Ira, the amazing Ira Lipson, is asking, one of the panelists mentioned a stereotype about ability to speak Spanish. How does the Spanish language intersect or not with some of the issues of identity you are discussing?
I mean, I don't know if I mentioned that or who else mentioned that in the panel, but I've definitely had that. You know, Dominicans, we have una manera tirada de hablar. So, you know, growing up, I went to regular school in DR, and so I like know how to speak Spanish well. But amongst Dominicans and amongst, you know, being comfortable in my community and with my people, I'm not going to be like, hola, ¿cómo estás? ¿Cómo fue tu día? But in high school, I definitely experienced a lot of that. I experienced a lot of like, why do you talk like that? Or you talk funny. That was something that was said a lot to me. And then what was interesting to see was, you know, when we look at urban music and reggaeton and I forget the name of the Dominican type of music, that dembow, right? And we see people imitating people from other not cultures, but other countries, other Latinx countries, sort of like imitating those accents. So it's funny to see how for some people it's funny, but other people want to like take on those identities. But now I love it. I think it's fun. Like we have a funny way of talking to people, but I love the way we talk. It makes us all, it's kind of like to what you were talking about, like what is the common thing that brings us all together? Is it Spanish? I don't know. Some of us, like our first language wasn't even Spanish. So it's interesting for sure.
It's interesting. I understood Ira's question to be about some of what's happening to my cousin's kids because they don't speak Spanish. And so they grow up in a household where, you know, it's very clear to them their Latinx background, but even within the family, you know, we tease them. You know, we start sort of pressuring, you know, a sense of, are you not proud of being Latinx because you don't speak the language? And they rightfully then turn to their parents and they say, well, she didn't speak Spanish to me other than yell at me. And those words I understood. But I think there is an element, I think, for as the generations get further removed from the language, maybe that's expressed at home in the culture, becomes part of a challenge for them to be able to claim their Latinx identity, because even among the Latinx community, it's like, if you don't speak Spanish, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's as we start to have multi-generational, right, and we're moving away from first generation, I think it's introducing that language isn't only what makes you Latinx, right? And that son las costumbres, son, you know, so many different things, so many different things.
Well, you hear people call each other gringo, right?
Oof.
You're trying to be a gringo, or te está poniendo aire, you know, all these things to basically say that what you're signaling is a denial of your background.
Right.
Or when I met my friend Rob Hernandez and I say hola in Spanish, and he say, I'm 8th generation Chicano. And I think Spanish was lost in the first generation. So don't come with your Latin American Spanish hegemony. It's like, all right, got it. Absolutely. So that's how different we are and how complex things are. It's 8:36. The fact that there are so many things we want to talk about and share and discuss is because all of this has to be discussed. Gender, race, identity, ethnicity, language, all these different things. It's not enough with one activity during the Hispanic Heritage Month. It should be an ongoing conversation. Students, Latinos Unidos, Latinx Unidos, have their organizations. Let me make a little bit of publicity. Students, you also have Latin American, Caribbean, and Latinx studies with wonderful, amazing faculty from sociology, theater and performance, literature, film, cinema studies, visual arts, art, political science, literature, playwriting, and screenwriting. We're a lot. And we do what we can, but we discuss all these different things in class. We do other history classes, theater. Andrea is here, I believe. Alfredo is here, Gary, Alexis, of course. So we're a bunch of nice people who want to keep the conversation going and bring all the elements, so then you don't complain that Purchase do not reflect. It should reflect more, of course, but things don't change unless we make them change. So we have new participants. Just one small comment, anecdote. Once a dear colleague of mine in environmental studies told me there is a Peruvian guy who's living in the woods, a student of us. And he is not sleeping well and he's not eating well. This was one of our students who decided to live in North White Plains in the woods to save money, to send money back to her sick mother in Peru who was deported. At that time, the rumor was that there was a crazy student who lived in the woods. Finally, long story short, we were able to find him housing at Purchase. He became the one who taught everyone in his building how to cook. He woke everyone up, and he ended up, he graduated with a 4.0 GPA in environmental studies. And he received his diploma, and there was no family to applaud him. Then I lost track of him after DACA, after the former president's decision about DACA, because he was a DACA student. So as we celebrate our Latino student, there are Latino lives that are still hard because of the place in which Latinidad is associated with illegality, with undocumented people, with criminality. And as I said before, this is part of US history. We speak in English with an accent, with a cute, beautiful accent. And let's occupy space. Let's make our voices heard. And as I'm wrapping this up, let's keep the conversation going. We need student, faculty, staff, and alumni working together to find ways. And we need to come up with goals, clear goals, concrete things, concrete steps that we can imagine and work together. So it's not only the conversation, but how do we move forward in order to get things done and how we can help each other. Those are my long 2 cents.
Well, thank you so much, Leandro. I think this is the beginning of a very beautiful affiliation across alumni, students, and Casa Purchase. I want to thank you, Leandro, the panelists, the participants, everyone who made this evening possible, and for sticking around. There's so many of you that were so engaged, and thank you again for engaging with us. If you are interested in, doing more with the Latinx Alumni Network, please feel free to shoot us an email at alumni@purchase.edu. This will just be the beginning of many more conversations and activities for us to engage on together and embark on together. So just, have a great rest of your night with your family and friends, and more to come.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks so much for coming out.
Of course, thank you, everyone.
I was shooting and I couldn't get, I just couldn't get home in time. I mean, my sincere apologies to you all.
Well, there'll be another one that I hope you'll be able to make.
Yes, please. It's very important. I think, also important to see what's happened at Purchase since I was there, and what's happening now. It's quite a transformation. It was such a it was just a small place. It was a very small place with very small student body, and to see how it's grown and all the people that have come through. I mean, it's quite a story. I was one of the only Latinos on the campus. There were like 3 of us at the time, and there was and none had been accepted into the theater arts department to that point. So it was quite a thing. And a lot happened after that, but I'll try to save that for the next time that we all get together and meet. Okay?
Absolutely. I don't know. Do you know Professor Benmergui?
No.
Hi, Luis Antonio. Hola, un gusto. Un placer.
Muy bien. Sí, un placer. Sí, un placer.
And I love to be in touch because, I mean, it's still hard, but we are doing what we can. And as President Peña said, we are 25% Latinos now, so it's a Hispanic serving institution. We have our first Latina president. So there are many things that we want to do, not only with Latinos, but the whole student body. And so many
fact
things.
That the president's a Latina was like, whoa, you know, that's quite, back then, Purchase was considered the suburbs. It was considered, in New York City, it was considered a suburb. For a kid from the projects. For me, it was like another world. And all of that open space coming from where I was raised in the projects, all of that open space. And remember, the student body was a third of what it is now, a third. And it was very, very exclusive, very kind of like handpicked. The students were all the art students, theater arts, the music, particularly those departments. And liberal arts was just beginning to evolve by the time I graduated. So it's been quite a journey for Purchase, you know.